As an autistic person, every time you speak about autism, you're advocating in some way. If I walk around with a lapel badge on her, saying Spectrum Voices, Autistic Radio, people will start a conversation with me. So everything I say from then on will have some tiny little butterfly wing effect on how they view autism, other autistic people. They're all small changes, they're all small differences. But it's also a responsibility, isn't it? I'm looking forward to my conversation with Richard. He has a whole career in autism, and that started before I even knew that I was autistic. So he's one of those professionals that can bring context. If you're autistic, there are plenty of very partisan groups. There are very fixed ideas. And I feel part of what we do here with Spectrum Voices is that we open ourselves to hear things from the profession. But we're here to listen, and we're here to understand. And it might be that if we do have an open conversation, somehow we can advocate. Somehow we can make a tiny change. Tiny changes are enough. When I offered Richard an open idea of what he could speak about today, I'm going to say I was surprised. It's the subject that you would have expected an autistic person to be coming on to speak about. It's not something I expected the professional to choose. But Richard has an unconventional attitude to autism. He has a reputation amongst autistic people for his open views, for his progressive views. So maybe we should expect the unexpected from this artist. Hello, Richard.
Hello.
It's an unusual choice. You say that you're going to reflect on your history of your profession and how autistic organisations have grown up during that time. Where does it start?
For me, it started working specifically with autistic people in 1991, in the early 90s, when I...
The music was different then?
Yeah, it meant, and the clothes were different. And yes, many things were different. I worked for what became Scottish Autism, was then the Scottish Society for Autistic Children and Adults.
Is that Autism Speaks for Scotland?
No. It's what is now called Scottish Autism. Behind the National Autistic Society, it's the largest autism organisation in Scotland. Helpline stuff and other kind of activities. They're a large autism organisation. They've gone through a few different name changes over the years. They originally started in the early 1980s, I think, as the Scottish Society for Autistic Children. Then they became the Scottish Society for Autistic Children and Adults. And then eventually they changed their name to Scottish Autism. And I was employed by them. That was my first job in autism. I've also subsequently worked with autism initiatives.
Where do we start with the how things have developed?
What my reflection is that, having worked for at least a couple of large autism organizations and knowing the National Autistic Society well, it's interesting to me that they all have a very, very similar starting point. That is, a group of parents of children that were being diagnosed as autistic when diagnosis was very new. These parents, recognizing that children were not getting the right education, started a charity. Most of those charities then ended up opening a service, typically a school. The school children then grew up, as they do, and became adults, and adult services started to be developed on the back of that. And that's a similar history for Scottish Autism, the National Autistic Society, Autism Initiatives, and indeed many smaller autism organizations throughout England that didn't grow beyond their small geographical areas. You have those organizations that all have a very similar early history. And I thought that's interesting and, I suppose, predictable with hindsight. Children grow up, services are needed. By and large, they were the autism organizations. There were other smaller, usually family-run helplines, family-run support groups, many of which still exist and have maintained their focus on providing peer support for families. What's happened since then, people who were diagnosed as autistic, some with Asperger's syndrome at that time, also then became involved.
Okay, so this is the time when it's the grown-up kids that have seen this system. Was there a reaction by these adults to what they had experienced as children?
Yes, I'm taking a very broad overview and not looking at a individual specific organization, because they each have their own history. When you look at the overall picture, you do see that gradually organizations being more and more led by autistic people. And more organizations being set up by autistic people, by new groups of parents, by lots of various kind of formats of organizations with various different missions and objectives.
So it's the Wild West?
Yes. Yeah.
Is it still the Wild West? Has that changed? Is that history or is that now?
That's now.
Right.
In my perception, many years ago, a politician, I think it was within Scottish government, said that if only the autism organisations could get together and decide what they want, then it would be easy to meet those needs. And I thought that was very telling in terms of what the approach was, but also telling about the understanding of autism and the variety of autism and how different people will inevitably want different things. Parents, individuals, depending on their geography, their location. So to expect there to be one mission, one objective that has priority is naive at best.
Wow. Okay. Ooh. Okay. Right. Let's delve into that.
When I was involved in the Scottish Strategy for Autism, sitting around a table with 10, 20 professionals, autistic individuals and parents and so forth, you very quickly got a sense that nobody there was ever going to agree on what the priority was.
Right.
What the priority is it diagnosis? Is it education? Is it family support? Yeah, all these things. Is it wider public understanding? Everybody would agree that these things are all important, but where should money be spent? Where should the priority be for development? That was never, I think, going to be agreed, because people are coming at this from different points of view and different places in their lives and different experiences. And I think for me, that's autism. That's the point. It affects all parts of society. It affects the family, individuals in all sorts of different ways. A colleague of mine often refers to the autism community, the difference between that and the deaf. If you are diagnosed deaf, there's a very much clearer pathway of what you're going to need.
Yep.
There'll be decisions made about how you're going to communicate. Is it going to be sign language? Is it going to be lip reading? There's a much clearer set of understood needs that is the easier, perhaps, for services, organizations to get their consensus of focus and thrust in their campaigning. Whereas autism, I think, is much more diverse in what the needs are, much more variable in terms of what people think the priorities should be.
Okay, so going back, there's a lot here. There's a lot of concepts. You had situations where you would have quite a large group around the table, and they were almost set up in opposition to each other, with somebody saying, give me a simple request that I can now fulfill. And they then have a whole bag of cats in a sack ripping at each other. Is that real?
Yes. I wouldn't put it quite as aggressively as that.
Okay.
Because if diagnosis was discussed, everybody would agree that diagnosis was problematic, there need to be improvements, and so on and so forth. But the level of priority that should be given would be very variable in people's opinions.
It's fighting over a small pot of money, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And not always just money, but, what's the priority? What should we be concentrating on? What should we be thinking about? What's going to make the biggest difference to the most people?
Your experience goes back to the mists of time where it was mess. But from that, different strands have come through. Which have been the most successful?
I think one of the key strands, and I kind of maybe refer to this at another point, is when I first started working on autism was very much felt to be still a mystery.
Right.
A mystery in terms of what is autism? How do we understand it? What causes it? What is it? How do we define it?
Could I interject and say that I feel that right now?
Yeah. Okay.
Somebody hands me a diagnosis.
Yes.
They don't then tell me what it is.
No.
I have to go out and I have to research and then come to my own conclusion about what it is and what it is for me rather than for anybody else.
Yes. And I suppose this is me as a professional looking at it externally, and the mystery is a different mystery, shall I say, because the mystery is perhaps now more about how autism affects the individual rather than what is it. Because I remember back in the 1980s that even the word autism or an autistic wasn't a word that was generally publicly recognized.
That's true.
I think now most people, if you say, certainly in this country, most people will at least have heard the word and have some little sense, at very least, of what that might be. It might be a false idea, it might be a myth, but they'll have some recognition of the word.
I think we have to reiterate that, don't we? It is going to be a false idea, isn't it? Because it's such a tiny amount of information they're going to be working on. It's changing,
Yeah, very possibly just based on one or two people that they either know or that they've seen media coverage, early exposure to the word autism. Many people will associate with Rain Man. And for many years, that was the answer you got when you talked to somebody new about autism. Oh, you mean like Rain Man? Now, when I've recently done some autism training and I've reflected on, and of course, the first insight many people got to autism was the film Rain Man, and I got a sea of blank faces.
It's
because it's out of date and people hadn't seen or heard of the film.
We have large organisations running rather large businesses as charities. When you change from something small and local, it changes everything. What What have they lost along the way, and what have they gained along the way?
I think many of them have filled a gap, filled a need, and grown because of that.
Provided services.
Absolutely. When no one else was doing that, or very few, the competition was small.
First to market.
Yeah. Particularly with the pressure of coming from, at least in education, many children had started to have what you might refer to as, good or bad, but an autism-specific education, an education where their autism was at least known about.
Recognised.
Yes. So you then have parents who are looking for an adult service provision for children who have come through an autism-specific education service. Hence, the need for kind of adult services to develop. Now, behind all this is still the recognition that a lot of autistic people have not been diagnosed or not accessed autism-specific education. It's easy for us who've been involved in autism service for a while to make assumptions about the life journeys of autistic people. And I also have to remind myself, I think, when you go back to those early days, the folk that were being diagnosed with autism were, by and large, non-verbal people with possibly a learning disability as well. That's the roots of those autism organisations, was those autistic people.
Okay, we can't gloss over this. We have to concentrate a little bit on that rather large thing that you've just said. Because it is, at the same time as these organisations are growing up, there is a radical redefinition of what autism is. And you've described it right at the beginning. It starts with people who we might use the word profound autism, or people who use alternative ways of communication. People who in that past were easy to recognise as different from the rest of society. And now what you appear to be saying is it's a much wider group, isn't it?
Absolutely. The numbers of people who are being diagnosed as autistic have grown in recognition of that greater awareness of what autism can look like.
Yeah.
That's good in that we have a much better and more wider sense and wider understanding. It has led, as you know, to autistic people being in positions of wanting to lead organizations, wanting to have their direct voice heard rather than necessarily through augmented means or through somebody else, through an advocate or whatever. I'm not being critical, because I'm not critical of the number of different organizations and campaigns that exist. I think I'm more reflecting on this is now the state of it, and whether it's good or bad, it's we can see how that has evolved into that, how it is inevitable given that variety of directions from which people will come from towards this.
So it's a politics thing now, isn't it?
It certainly can be, yeah.
It's a large enough group for there to be internal politics within the group, the autistic group.
Yes. It's interesting that, again, when I go back to the 1980s and early into the 1990s, most autism organizations in Britain were affiliated to the National Autistic Society. It was a fairly loose organizational structure, but there was a kind of a recognition that there was the one big organization and then lots of others. That faded away in the 1990s, and other groups became more autonomous, became larger, had very much more focused views on what they wanted to achieve for the people they were representing.
I come from this from completely outside, as you know. Late diagnosed with a version of autism that to me is a complete positive sense of my identity. So I don't come from a background of somebody who's been targeted for services.
Yeah.
If I come from that aspect, not being a professional and not having the background that you do, the demarcation I see in organisations, if you can go to a simple one, a black and white one, is that there is a group of organisations that predominantly work as businesses to create services, and it's a matter of following the money. And then there's another group of organisations that seem to me to be predominantly trying to create a version of autism as a perception that is a positive identity. That seems to be the demarcation to me. Does that make sense, or am I being naive?
No, that makes sense. And I think an interesting question to test that is does the organization have an ambition to not be needed, to not exist anymore?
Oh, wow. Hang on. Let me get my head around that. Well, whoa. No, you can't blow my mind and then just talk over it. Let me think. Right. Let me think about that one. Prefer not to exist.
Not to be needed to exist.
Not to be needed. Like Mandela trying to overcome apartheid.
Yeah. Yes.
Wow.
I think you can always need backup and also recognition support when you've got the autistic scene's own arguments to cope with, and the ebb and flow of them. They don't want to leave it's things totally to that. So the other thing, that there will always be a role for the professional backup.
Yes, I agree with that, Maurice. There will probably always need to be that role. I suppose what I'm trying to say is, what's it trying to do? Is it trying to exist for the sake of existing? Or is it trying to make a change, trying to influence things? And that might look quite similar in terms of it's a service provider doing similar things. But is it a service provider that wants to make changes, both in the services it delivers and potentially wider than that actually have that kind of long-term impact on individuals and society? So the need for its existence becomes less and less, or evolves, or changes, or adapts to whatever the priority needs are. I think, to go back to what you were saying, Julian, about organizations and their development into whatever their roots, development into big businesses.
They call themselves charities, but that's a version of business, isn't it?
Multi-million pound business. Yes, absolutely, yes. And I completely get where they're coming from and their history and what they want to do. I think we came to a stage maybe 15 years ago plus when the best autism services, I would say, probably used to be provided by the big autism organizations and the small autism organizations. I now know myself and colleagues can go into a generic service provider and see whether that's a school or an adult service and see excellent, fantastic work that surpasses the work of some of the autism organizations. So I don't think that there's a monopoly there of best practice that used to exist. That's not saying these other the autism organizations don't have a right to exist if they're providing good services and they're commissioned and so on and so forth. It's not denying that, but it is questioning their assumption of the need for them.
Going back to what you said, this bombshell about the difference between two types of organizations, and there's an organization that sets itself up to eventually put itself out of business. And then there's another organization that becomes an establishment. To me, coming from a business background, it always appears that because of the way we organize our society in free market capitalism, the real power, the real unseen hand of the market is amongst the business forward charities that are creating a service, creating work, creating a hierarchy of organization. They have all of the impetus. People get jobs and get paid.
Mm-hmm.
And the other part that you describe, the organization that might aspire to no longer exist, is the David in the David and Goliath.
Mm. Yes, I suppose the question I'm asking of, I don't have the answer to this, is can a large business orientated organization still have that ultimate altruistic objective? I think it's hard, but I'd like to think it is still possible, because there are many needs that still to be met. It's easy to see gaps in services, gaps in knowledge, understanding, whatever. We're not there yet. We've got an awful lot to do still. So there's a need for businesses, for organizations to continue to do their work. There's something about the culture of an organization, however, that, for example, I recently spent time with an organization who, irrespective of whether the need was there, if there was not a decent level of profit or surplus in it, they were much, much less interested in pursuing that opportunity, even to the extent of if it was just, it would break even, it wouldn't cost anything to do that bit of work. But unless there was a real kind of, financial, and the argument they would make is, well, profit enables us to develop more and more services, which is not one I'm dismissing. But there is a cultural sense of where you start to examine these options that I think is telling on what an organization is seeking to do.
I can just imagine that phrase in the edit.
They certainly sound like organizations not taking their cue from autistic people.
Absolutely. Organizations, and I'm not necessarily thinking of any particular ones here.
I don't think you need to caveat that all the time. I think we'll cope with that.
They certainly sound like organizations not taking their cue from autistic people.
Yes, I would also say there are organizations who will be tokenistic in their involvement of the users of the service, in how the organization is run, what its priorities are. There is sadly a lot of tokenistic consultation, advocacy, surveys of how our people are thinking about us, those kind of things, which is sadly distracts, I think, sometimes from the importance of involvement. But yes, I agree with what you've said there, Maurice.
If we imagine that we have these now large organizations, charities and businesses and service providers, and they have an imperative to create enough income from their grants, from their money-raising activities to pay their people. They don't necessarily have shareholders, but they do they do want to pay people, and they do have quite well paid people amongst them for good reason. You need skills.
Yeah.
And then on the other side of it, you had these smaller David and Goliath versions of organizations that are trying to make themselves no longer necessary by changing the world, leaving it in a better place, and then closing down. It is, in some ways, just identity against capital. It's identity against a world that is organized for the running of business. It's those people that you had right back in the beginning in your idea of a lot of people all the way around the table saying different things, and the politicians saying, can you all just get together and decide what you want so I can produce it? Well, the people who are now providing that answer to the politicians are the Goliath groups, the large charities.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a performative exercise in taking on the language and some of the ideas from the essentially campaign groups for identity, autism identity, and using those same words, but really running a very large organization, large business that is there to be itself.
Yeah.
It's already organized. It's an organization. It's not just a group of disparate people now. The organization is bigger than the people in it.
Mm-hmm. It's easier, I think, for politicians to go to large organizations or the large structures that already exist and look to them for the solution to the things that they are having to deal with, whether that's local or national politicians, governments. It's easy to look for solutions to their problems, their constituents who are raising concerns or whatever, than it is to, there's an instant market, there's an instant audience there for them to engage with, to consult with. And that's not being critical necessarily of politicians. They've got the, people who can help them deal with this, fix this problem. And I think I'm just conscious of what I said there, fix this problem. And I think that is really telling about the political and potential, to some extent, the business approach to this. It's about a problem that needs to be fixed, rather than it just being more of an issue about how society has evolved and how individuals function within that society.
Yeah, well, that's a short-termism of politics, isn't it?
Indeed, yeah.
I need to get this sorted, buy a service, say that I created a service or got a service, it's solved this, re-elect me.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And the organisations, have they got so big now that the words of the autistic community might not be as powerful as they once were? Maybe they were more powerful in the days of the Wild West at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Because there was less external pressure to tick certain boxes, for sure. Yeah, it's interesting to think of it like that.
It's scary for me to think of it like that. Because it means to me that I've missed the boat. If ever I wanted to change the way people reacted to autism in those organizations, my time has gone.
It's hard to speak for all of those organizations we might put into this category. and I'm not speaking for any of them actually, but one can understand how they are in this position. It's the business, the people who control the money that they need to survive are those local and national governments. They are subject to the whims of and the methodology under which they work. This short-termism. Contracts for work are often short-term, and they have to respond to whatever box needs to be ticked at that time.
My name is on the open letter to the NAS. It was really good at responding to families in its starting up time, but I don't think it's ever had a history of responding outside its own priority choices to adult-raised issues in the period since the growth of adult recognition, the period I've known the scene the last 20 years, say, the child author issue that has never been made to take up being one that's got to me.
So for people, the NAS is the National Autistic Society, which is the largest UK charity. Maybe it's the equivalent to Autism Speaks in the United States, though they might not want to align themselves too closely because of the controversy around Autism Speaks.
Absolutely. Yes, the National Autistic are seen. The name gives it away really as the voice of autism for the UK, particularly in England and Wales to some extent. Maybe less so in Scotland, because we do have other large organisations like Scottish Autism that would also seek to be the big organisational voice of autism. No, these organisations obviously will work together and campaign together on different things.
The point that Maurice raises is quite key to all of this when we think about money again, because youth has money attached to it through educational budgets and through health services for the children of parents, and parents have votes and voices. So Maurice's experience saying that the largest organisation that we have predominantly looks at the child and does not have a long-term good reputation for looking at the whole of life, though I know that they would say that they have considered it.
They certainly support adult services, and just then they don't respond to the items from us. They choose their own priorities.
Well, I think that's what I'm trying to say. If they're being spoken to by the parents of children, that's a voice that can be counted, and it comes from their history as Richard has expressed. But then when they're providing services to adults, there isn't yet or there doesn't appear from the outside to be a very open consultation with the adult users of those services. Is that fair?
Yes, very.
When we talk about consultation with service users, adults, again, I think sometimes this goes back to what is most easily achieved. And it will be those people that you are maybe already providing a service to, or are easy for you to access, rather than perhaps more ambitious ways of, or sometimes maybe more difficult ways of getting the breadth of views autistic people.
There's also a money issue, isn't there? An autistic child comes with a budget. An autistic adult doesn't come with a budget. An autistic child, every additional autistic child that you're providing a service to, you can send an invoice for. In our adult services, it appears from the outside to me to be a service without the funding for additional numbers. So every new adult using that service is a burden. So taking into account the adult autistic community's opinions costs money. There isn't the funding to improve or take into account those opinions. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I would qualify that, though, by adult taking into account adult opinions costs money in the short term. And it's short-termism again. Because if we get it right, then it should be at the very least cost neutral.
I don't know, Richard. I feel, as an autistic person who's come to this late and has time in his retirement and wants to do something useful, wants to not necessarily start another business or something, but just to have a sense of purpose in the years before death. I feel locked out. And I don't know quite how to find a way in to be useful. I don't want to be outside an organisation with a placard. But I don't see the routes for me to be useful and helpful and take away some of the burden that I believe organised autistic people could achieve. I think there are now, because it's a wider group, if we go back to your history when you were saying it was mostly profoundly autistic people that were recognised as autistic, and now we have in America they say it's over 2-point-something% of their population will at some time be diagnosed as autistic. We can say that is a very large increase from a 0-point-something% that would have been recognised in the last century. So it's a huge difference. And that is because those newly diagnosed autistic people like myself are not profoundly autistic. We are as autistic as anyone else, but a different set of personalities and parts of us. We are an absolute resource. And there is no way for us, it seems, other than by making nuisances of ourselves, to be effective. Is that okay, me saying that? What does that feel like?
I would ask effective, for clarity, effective in what?
That's a good point. Being useful. And I think if we look at what Spectrum Voices is about, it's about demonstrating a positive identity. Because from positive identity comes confidence, and if you have enough autistic people with confidence and self-esteem, then they can achieve things, they can help each other, they can support each other as a group. Not against a system, not just support each other as a group to campaign and make a nuisance of themselves, but to alternatively create an atmosphere or a community. And it doesn't seem as though it's being facilitated. It seems as though the business side of things works against that. we seem like a free resource that's underused.
Yes.
Is that recognisable to you as a professional? Or does that sound like a complete load of baloney from an old Aspie, you know?
No, it doesn't sound like baloney. It does kind of fit with the way I think about how people are involved and as you say, how people are free. The free resources that you refer to of people, it feels so logical and easy, and you have to then question, well, why is that not being done? Why are people not being used to make the changes you would want to make, and so forth?
I think I've pushed you here, and I think we can stop this conversation right now. You have no need to answer this. Why don't we go away and think about it and come back?
Yeah.
It's time for thinking and reflection. The next time we meet, you proposed the idea of speaking about whether we've progressed from autism the mystery to then autism, let's get it fixed, to then maybe autism, accept and celebrate. And that's what we're going to be talking next time. So will you come back and will you address those things and have a break from me now?
I would be delighted to come back, of course, and to continue this conversation. I look forward to it.
Well, I've learnt a lot today and I've been challenged, so I'm looking forward to that too. Has anybody else anything that they want to say as a last word, guys?
Just that I found it very interesting. I know I've been very quiet in this one, but this one was certainly an interesting listening brief. And it just shows you that although a lot of strides have been made, a lot more strides need to be made further. So it's a good journey so far, and I look forward to further conversations, particularly on how autism is looked upon in terms of something to be fixed and something to be celebrated.